Hi, thank you for joining me once again. On this video, we will wrap up our review of endocrine system, and we will do this by looking at each of the endocrine glands in a little more detail. So let's get started. So earlier, we already saw this nice diagram of endocrine glands. You will find it also at this week's module in case you wish to print it for yourself as you take notes. And here you can see each of these endocrine glands labeled too. You can fill your sheet as we work through these to review some of the major features of each, or you can pause the video here to make your own notes. Let's start with hypothalamus and pituitary gland, as they are so closely linked. Hypothalamus and pituitary gland are connected via a fundibulum. And hypothalamus secretes many hormones, some of which then act on pituitary gland. Pituitary gland is actually divided in two parts, posterior and anterior pituitary gland. The posterior pituitary gland is under neural and endocrine control from hypothalamus. And some important hormones that are secreted from here are oxytocin, which plays a vital role in childbirth and lactation through positive feedback loop, and ADH, which is antidiuretic hormone. This is the hormone that prevents us from making as much pee. It is the secretions from the posterior pituitary gland that mainly control the anterior pituitary gland. And some important hormones secreted from the anterior pituitary gland are growth hormone, thyroid stimulating hormone, hormones that regulate adrenal gland, follicle stimulating hormone, and luteinizing hormone, which regulate female menstrual cycle, and prolactin, which regulates lactation. So that's our hypothalamus and pituitary gland. Now, let's move our attention to thyroid gland. As shown on this picture, thyroid gland is kind of a butterfly-shaped structure, located at the anterior part of the neck, just below the larynx, which is of course our voice box where the vocal cords are at. You can also see the laryngeal prominence, commonly known as Adam's apple here. And here we have a really nice histological sample of thyroid. We can see follicular cells. These produce thyroglobulin. And colloid, which is the fluid in the follicle, it gets made into thyroid hormone. And one more structure that I want to highlight from here is parafollicular cells. These make calcitonin. The physiology of this is little known, but it has a role with bone strength. And there can be issues if there is too much or too little of it. Another thing that I want to show here is that, as you can see from this picture, thyroid gland receives a rich blood supply. So you might ask, why is thyroid hormone so important? Well, it's all about metabolism. So T3 is converted to T4, and it affects all of the body. For example, BMR, our basal metabolic rate, tissue growth and development, and blood pressure. The production of thyroid hormone is a multi-step process, which you can study in more detail from your textbook. Let's have a look at some of the clinical considerations. Here we see enlarged thyroid. This is Graves' disease. These patients would be characterized by having high metabolic rate, sweating, rapid and irregular heart rate, appearing nervous, and having weight loss. Another condition that can result is edema that causes eyes to bulge and be fibrous. So, how to treat these conditions? We might remove some of the thyroid or destroy active cells by giving radioactive substance. I also want to show parathyroid gland. These are tiny yellow-brown glands on thyroid, and they produce parathyroid hormone. This controls calcium homeostasis. An effect, for example, kidneys and urine production, intestine and digestion, and skeleton strength, as well as vitamin D activation. Okay, we are ready to look at adrenal gland. These are pyramid-shaped structures at the top of the kidneys. It's made of two parts that have both a structural and functional differences. Cortex is where 24 different hormones are secreted from. Some of these include mineralocorticoids, which play a role in regulating electrolyte concentrations, aldosterone, which play important role in kidney function, energy production in ATPase, and blood pressure regulation, plasma concentration, and urination. If there is, for example, a tumor in adrenal gland, we can end up with aldosteronism, where we have too much aldosterone. The functions may fail and nervous system be affected due to the chemical imbalance. Adrenal cortex produces also glucocorticoids, which are important in metabolism, stress responses, and regulation of glucose levels of blood. Examples of these would include cortisol, hydrocortisone, corticosterone. And from the adrenal medulla, nervous system control for the sympathetic nervous system. Remember fight or flight response. I have included a link to the video of this from our previous course. Hormones involved here would be epinephrine and norepinephrine. They are, for example, stimulators of heart rate and play a role in diverting blood to the vital organs. Next, I want to mention pineal gland. This is located by the third ventricle of the brain. It is an important gland for producing melatonin. And we remember that melatonin was what controlled sleep-wake cycle. Okay, let's talk about the pancreas. We already mentioned this briefly on one of our earlier videos as an example of a gland that is both endocrine and exocrine. The exocrine role of pancreas is to produce digestive juice. But for our purposes on this chapter, we are especially interested in the endocrine function. And this is, of course, the blood sugar regulation. The cells known as islets of Langerhans are what produce glucagon and insulin. And it is the balance of these that drives the blood sugar regulation. From a clinical perspective, type 1 diabetes is associated with an issue in secretion, while type 2 is more to do with the activity of these secretions. In a clinical work, we would be looking for glucose in the urine as an indicator of issues with this. Okay, let's look at the gonads next. So these produce our sex hormones. For females, ovaries produce estrogen and progesterone, and for males, testes produce testosterone. And I should also mention the hormonal role of placenta in maintaining the pregnancy. There is one other one that is often forgotten, but important for us to note: leptin. Leptin is secreted from adipose tissue, and it controls appetite. Here is an interesting picture pair. The mice on the left lacks leptin or leptin receptors, and the one on the right is with leptin. So leptin can be used as a hormone replacement therapy to treat overweight caused by the issues with this hormone. The last one that I want to mention, and we have not yet discussed about, is of course our thymus. It is larger in children and infants, but then shrinks as one grows older, getting replaced by connective and adipose tissue. It is especially important in the immune system, being the site of production for T cells. So that's it. We have now concluded our quick review of major endocrine glands. This concludes the voiceover lecture videos for this chapter. Please do not hesitate to return to these as you use them to supplement your textbook.